Those are, okay, so, but what you're saying, if you're saying, correct me if I'm wrong,
Okay.
I'm not trying to be difficult. You're saying that those are your starting positions. Those are the things that you accept.
I'm saying they can be.
Faith.
No.
Oh, you have a rationale for them.
Yes.
Let's hear it.
You already have. Life is generally preferable to death because we're talking about our life.
Absolutely brilliant. Matt Dillahunty, the self-appointed Pope of atheism, just gave us the most profound philosophical insight of the century. Life is generally preferable to death because we're talking about our life. Wow. Stop the presses. Alert the philosophy departments. This guy just cracked the code that has stumped humanity for millennia. You know what this is? This is what happens when you take a guy who couldn't make it as a real philosopher and give him a YouTube channel. Matt's sitting there acting like he's discovered some fundamental truth about human existence when really he's just stating the obvious in the most pretentious way possible. Life is generally preferable to death. You know who else figured that out? Every living thing on the planet. Even bacteria know this. But Matt had to dress it up in fancy language to make it sound like he invented the concept. This is the new atheist movement in a nutshell, taking simple, obvious truths and presenting them as revolutionary insights that only enlightened secular minds can grasp. These people think they're the first generation in human history to figure out that people don't want to die. It's intellectual masturbation disguised as deep thinking. Matt's whole career is built on convincing college kids that common sense is actually sophisticated philosophy, as long as you say it with enough smugness.
And death is generally not in the interest of the living. It can be an exception. This is the point that I was getting to. So you could start with those founded. You could start with any three that you found. You could pick three arbitrary foundations. And the one aspect that makes a secular moral system distinct from religious pronouncements and divine command theory and those sorts of things is that the secular moral system has as its goal the object of getting better at getting better, which means if you find out that one of your foundations is wrong or in conflict with something else, you can now change that.
Getting better at getting better. Listen to this corporate buzzword bullshit. Matt's talking about morality like he's running a tech startup. We're disrupting the ethics space with our innovative approach to moral optimization. This is what happens when you spend too much time in conference rooms and not enough time in the real world. Matt's trying to sell you on the idea that his moral system is superior because it's flexible. But here's the thing, if your moral foundations can be changed whenever they become inconvenient, then they're not foundations at all. They're focus group results. They're whatever's trending on social media this week. This is the new atheist con game. They promise you rational, evidence-based morality, but what they deliver is whatever happens to be popular with their audience at any given moment. Matt's not offering you moral truth, he's offering you moral customer service. Your values not working out for you? No problem. We'll update them in the next patch. The guy's basically admitting that his entire moral framework is built on quicksand, but he's trying to sell that as a feature. Look how adaptable we are. Yeah, Matt, you know what else is adaptable? A weather vane. A con artist. A politician during election season. Moral flexibility is just another word for having no principles worth defending.
You could start with death as preferable to life, and then when you find out that it's not working that well, you change that foundation.
Did this genius just suggest that we could start with death is preferable to life as a moral foundation and then change it when we discover it's not working that well? How exactly would we discover that, Matt? By conducting exit interviews with the corpses? This is the kind of absurd hypothetical that only makes sense in the fantasy world of academic debate clubs. Let's try promoting death over life and see how it goes. You know what would happen if we actually tried that? We'd all be dead. Problem solved. No more moral dilemmas because there'd be no more people to have them. But Matt thinks this is a reasonable example of how his scientific moral system works. This is what the new atheist movement has given us, people who are so in love with the sound of their own voices that they'll say anything as long as it sounds clever. Matt's treating human survival like it's a beta test feature. Hey, let's experiment with mass suicide for a few decades and see how the data looks. It's not sophisticated thinking, it's what happens when you mistake verbal diarrhea for intellectual discourse. The fact that Matt thinks this is a compelling argument tells you everything you need to know about how disconnected these people are from reality. They live in a world of abstract concepts and hypothetical scenarios, completely insulated from the consequences of their ideas. It's easy to treat morality like a thought experiment when you're not one of the test subjects.
I think that these foundations, based on the evidence of how people tend to live their lives and what they care about, are a good set of three. There could be better ones that somebody come up with. I'm open to revision on any of these at any time. But to say that I'm not skeptical about them is exactly the opposite of what I am. Because skepticism is about, I'm not going to accept something as true without good reason. And it's about being open to revision should there be evidence. If you and I agree that we care about a good life isn't very well defined. And we may have different ideas about what good life is. But if we could actually just sit here and take notes, I think that we'd come across maybe a handful of things that we would agree would make for a good life. If we take those and compare them to the foundations of a secular moral system like what I'm describing, we can determine non-subjectively whether or not the list we've come up with are consistently approachable from that foundation. And we can do that for religious morality as well. The analogy that I've used in the past is, for example, a game of chess.
Of course. Matt's favorite analogy is chess. Because nothing says, I understand human nature, like comparing it to a board game invented by people who had way too much time on their hands. You know what's wrong with this analogy? Everything. Chess is a game where the pieces don't have feelings, families, or futures. Chess is a game where you can restart if you make a mistake. Chess is a game where the worst consequence of a bad move is that you lose a game and have to reset the board. But Matt thinks this is somehow analogous to moral decision-making in the real world. This is the new atheist mindset perfectly encapsulated. They think human beings are just chess pieces that can be moved around according to rational principles. They've never had to tell a parent that their child is dead because of some moral experiment. They've never had to live in the communities destroyed by their enlightened social engineering. They just sit in their comfortable studios, playing with ideas like they're moving pieces on a board. Matt's chess analogy reveals everything about how he sees other people, as game pieces to be manipulated by superior intellects like himself. He's the grandmaster, and the rest of us are just pawns in his rational universe. It's the arrogance of academic philosophy on full display, treating human suffering like it's an interesting puzzle to be solved rather than a reality to be lived.
There's nothing about the universe that requires that we care about chess or care about the rules of chess. The rules of chess are arbitrary. Somebody made them up. We changed them. We added en passant. We added castling. We added things like that. We have the rules of chess. We don't always know what the best move is. But if the goal of the game is to win, or at a minimum, not lose, then we can analyze the moves with respect to the consequences and with respect to the goal of winning and determine which moves are better and which moves are worse. That is what a secular moral system does because it allows revision, whereas religious systems don't allow for revision.
And here's Matt's big finish, the real reason for this whole intellectual tap dance. It's not about finding truth or building a better moral system. It's about attacking religion. Matt's entire argument boils down to, my system is better because it's not religious. You know what this is? This is atheist fundamentalism. Matt's so obsessed with proving that religious morality is wrong that he's willing to throw away any concept of moral stability or consistency. Look how flexible we are compared to those rigid religious people. Yeah, Matt, you know what else is flexible? Jell-O doesn't make it a good foundation for a building. Matt wants to have it both ways. He wants the authority that comes with claiming to have moral truth, but he also wants the freedom to change his mind whenever it's convenient. He's like a contractor who promises to build you a house but reserves the right to change the blueprints whenever he feels like it. Oh, you wanted a foundation? Sorry, we decided foundations are too rigid. We're going with a more flexible approach. The irony is that Matt's criticism of religious morality, that it can't be revised, is actually one of its strengths. Some things shouldn't be revised. Some moral truths are worth defending even when they're unpopular. But Matt's system has no mechanism for determining which principles are worth preserving and which ones can be discarded. It's moral relativism with a PhD.
There's not a Bible 3.0. There's not a Quran 2.0.
This is what happens when you spend too much time online. You start thinking everything needs to be updated like an iPhone app. Maybe, don't murder innocent people, doesn't need a patch. Maybe, don't steal from your neighbors, doesn't need a new release cycle. Maybe, treat others with basic human dignity, doesn't need to be constantly revised based on the latest social science research. But Matt can't conceive of moral principles that might actually be correct and worth preserving. In his world, everything has to be constantly updated and revised, because the alternative, that there might be some truths that transcend his personal opinions, is too threatening to his ego. He'd rather have a moral system that changes with the weather than one that might actually tell him he's wrong about something. This is the new atheist obsession with appearing more evolved than everyone else. They can't just disagree with traditional moral systems, they have to present themselves as the next stage in human development.
There's no new revelation from God to say, hey, I said all this stuff about slavery, now I'm opposed to it. Or, hey, I was really down on homosexuals, but now I'm okay with it.
And here's where Matt's true agenda becomes crystal clear. He's not really interested in moral philosophy, he's interested in sexual politics. Notice how his examples of moral progress that religion supposedly can't handle are slavery and homosexuality. What a coincidence that these just happen to be the two biggest talking points of contemporary progressive politics. Matt's entire philosophical project is really just an elaborate justification for sexual liberation and progressive social politics. He's constructed this whole, revisable morality framework so he can argue that traditional moral constraints on sexual behavior are outdated and need updating. It's not about finding moral truth, it's about removing moral barriers to doing whatever he wants. Here's what Matt won't tell you. His evolved position on homosexuality isn't based on some sophisticated moral reasoning, it's based on the same kind of social pressure and cultural conformity that he criticizes in religious communities. Matt didn't arrive at his pro-gay position through careful philosophical analysis, he adopted it because that's what his social circle expects, and because it fits with his broader project of sexual liberation. But Matt wants to pretend that his moral positions are the result of rational deliberation rather than cultural conformity. He's just as much a product of his environment as any religious believer.
Hey, when I said that here's what caused diseases, or that you were unclean and shouldn't enter the temple, all those things are actually wrong. The germ theory of disease is right, and none of that's come out.
Well, there is kind of a Bible 2.0. That was the New Testament, right?
Well,
so that
is the update for the Christians, except that it's worse than the first one.
Well, that's not exactly the point. The point is there was an update. So,
the update, it's not like Jesus came along and said, hey, in Exodus 21, where I was saying you could have slaves and beat them, we got that wrong, or you got that wrong. That correction's never given. That thing about, in Leviticus, where we point out that women are worth 2/3 of that of a man, we got that wrong.
Look at how he frames this. Women are worth 2/3 of that of a man. That's not what Leviticus says, but Matt doesn't care about accuracy when he's got a narrative to push. You know what Matt's doing here? He's taking ancient legal codes about temple vows and monetary valuations and turning them into modern gender politics. It's like reading a medieval guild contract and declaring that it proves craftsmen hated apprentices. Matt's either too ignorant to understand historical context or too dishonest to acknowledge it. This is the intellectual fraud that drives me crazy. Matt wants to judge 3,000-year-old legal systems by 21st century social media standards, but when his own, revisable, moral system produces disasters, suddenly we need to be understanding about context and complexity. When secular progressive policies destroy families and communities, Matt's crowd says, well, we're still figuring things out. But when ancient societies had different economic and social structures, that's proof they were morally inferior. Here's what Matt won't tell you. Those ancient systems he's mocking created stable societies that lasted thousands of years. They produced art, literature, philosophy, and scientific advancement. They built civilizations that Matt's revisable morality is actively destroying. But sure, Matt, tell us more about how your constantly changing moral framework is superior to systems that actually worked for millennia. The guy's got the historical awareness of a goldfish and the moral authority of a weather vane, but he thinks he can lecture civilization about right and wrong. It's pathetic.
None of that's corrected. In fact, the reason I say it got worse, although I didn't know we were going to go down the biblical route tonight, is that If you look at Jewish tradition, when you're dead, you sleep with your fathers. There's no real clear notion of an afterlife. And then with the introduction of the New Testament, what you get is infinite torture and punishment for finite crimes, which is immoral.
And there it is, Matt's trump card. He's gotcha moment. Infinite punishment for finite crimes is immoral. You know what's hilarious about this? Matt just used his supposedly revisable moral system to make an absolute, definitive moral judgment. No hedging, no, well, we might revise this later, no, this is just our current best guess. He's declaring something absolutely, categorically immoral. So which is it, Matt? Is your moral system revisable and flexible, or are you willing to make absolute moral pronouncements? Because you can't have it both ways. Either you're confident enough in your moral reasoning to make definitive judgments, or you're not. But here's what's really rich about Matt's position. He's using his finite human reason to judge infinite divine justice, but he won't apply that same skepticism to his own moral intuitions about sexuality and social issues. Matt's perfectly willing to question God's moral judgments, but don't you dare question his enlightened progressive positions on gender, marriage, or sexual behavior. This is the fundamental dishonesty of Matt's entire project. He presents himself as this open-minded, rational thinker who's willing to revise his positions based on evidence, but in practice, he's just as dogmatic as any religious fundamentalist. He's just dogmatic about different things. Try challenging his assumptions about sexual liberation or progressive social policy and watch how quickly his rational facade crumbles.
All right, so I don't want to go down that rabbit hole at the moment, although I'd be perfectly happy to do it.
What we just witnessed is a perfect example of what happens when amateur philosophy meets real-world arrogance. Matt Dillahunty, the self-appointed spokesman for rational morality, just spent several minutes demonstrating that his moral system is built on quicksand and held together with intellectual duct tape. Let's break down what Matt actually accomplished here. He started by claiming that his moral foundations are rationally justified, then immediately admitted they're arbitrary and can be changed at will. He argued that moral systems should be revisable, then made absolute moral pronouncements about religious doctrine. He compared human morality to chess, as if the consequences of moral decisions are no more serious than losing a board game. He attacked religious morality for being unchangeable, then couldn't explain how his own system determines which changes are improvements and which are corruptions. This is what passes for sophisticated thinking in Matt's world, a moral system that can be updated like software, where yesterday's moral truth can become tomorrow's moral error, and where the only principle that can't be revised is the principle that everything can be revised. It's relativism pretending to be rationality. The most revealing moment was when Matt declared that infinite punishment for finite crimes is immoral. Not, might be immoral pending further revision, not, seems immoral based on our current understanding, but definitively, absolutely immoral. In that moment, Matt revealed that he doesn't actually believe his own system. When it comes to making moral judgments that matter to him, he abandons the wishy-washy relativism and makes absolute claims just like everyone else. Matt's entire philosophical project is based on a fundamental dishonesty. He wants the authority to make moral judgments without the responsibility that comes with believing in moral truth. He wants to be the moral teacher while insisting that there are no moral lessons worth teaching permanently. He wants to criticize other moral systems while admitting that his own system has no stable foundation. This is the intellectual bankruptcy of modern secular ethics on full display. Matt represents a generation of thinkers who are so afraid of being wrong that they've made being uncertain into a virtue. They've confused intellectual humility with intellectual cowardice, and they've built entire careers on the pretense that moral confusion is somehow more sophisticated than moral clarity. The tragedy is that Matt actually raises some legitimate questions about religious morality that deserve serious answers. But instead of engaging with those questions honestly, he's constructed a philosophical house of cards that collapses the moment you examine it closely. He's more interested in winning debates than finding truth, more concerned with appearing smart than being wise. Matt Dillahunty is what happens when intelligence is divorced from wisdom, when cleverness is mistaken for insight, and when the ability to argue is confused with the ability to understand. He's built a career on being the smartest guy in the room without ever bothering to get the education that might actually make him smart, but he's never stopped to ask whether the room he's in has any connection to the real world where actual people have to live with the consequences of their moral choices. Matt's revisable moral system is just another form of fundamentalism, atheist fundamentalism. Instead of "God said it, I believe it, that settles it," Matt's motto is "Reason said it, I believe it, but I might change my mind later." It's not an improvement, it's just a different kind of intellectual prison, one with more comfortable furniture but the same locked doors.